The unexpected recruit. The sound of boots thumping against the hard concrete echoed throughout the training hall as the new recruits lined up in formation. The morning air was crisp, and the tension in the atmosphere was thick, as though every person standing there knew that their lives were about to change forever. The uniformed officers moved through the ranks, inspecting each one closely. Some were veterans, hardened by countless battles, while others were fresh faces, nervous, unsure of what lay ahead. Among them, a young woman stood, trying to keep her back straight and her hands steady, though she felt the weight of every pair of eyes on her. Emma, a recruit who was only here by a stroke of luck, had never imagined herself in this situation. She was just a regular person, a librarian, not a soldier. How had she ended up here in the middle of a military training ground? She had no idea. She wasn't built for combat, and yet here she was, standing among the toughest recruits in the system. She had always been the kind of person who preferred quiet spaces over battlefields, books over weapons. But now, her heart pounded in her chest and her legs felt weak as the officers moved on to the next recruit, giving her a brief but sharp look as they passed by. Emma knew she was out of place. She could feel it in her bones. The commanding officer, General Wraith, was a man known for his stern demeanor and unyielding discipline. His reputation preceded him. No one had ever seen him show mercy, and every recruit was terrified of him. He walked slowly, scanning the new recruits one by one with a piercing gaze that seemed to cut through them. When he reached Emma, his eyes lingered just a little longer than necessary. His expression was unreadable, but she could feel the weight of his judgment. Emma swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. She could hear the whispers from the other recruits. They knew she wasn't cut out for this. She had no experience, no special skills. She wasn't like the others who had spent their whole lives preparing for this. She had been selected for some reason, probably because there was no one else. It wasn't the kind of reason she was proud of, but it was the reality she was stuck with. Emma, the general's voice boomed, making her flinch. You're the last in line, but not the least. You'll either survive or get eliminated in the first week. I'm not interested in anyone who doesn't give their all. Understand? Yes, sir, Emma replied, her voice barely above a whisper. General. Wraith nodded as if assessing her every word. Emma knew he wasn't convinced, and neither was she. Her nerves twisted in her stomach, but she stood firm, determined to survive. She had to. There was no other option. Behind them, a strange noise cut through the air. The recruits tensed, and Emma turned toward the sound. The ground began to shake as if something massive was approaching. It was a low rumble at first, then grew louder and louder until it became a deafening roar. The recruits' faces went pale as they turned to look in the direction of the sound. From behind a tall fence, the shape of something enormous began to emerge, something unlike anything Emma had ever seen. It was a creature large and terrifying, moving with a power that seemed to ripple through the air. Its body was muscular, its skin covered in scales that gleamed under the sun. Its eyes were an eerie shade of yellow, glowing with intelligence that was unmistakable. It was the Predator X, a genetically engineered apex predator, created for war, designed to be faster, stronger, and deadlier than any human soldier. The creature stood nearly 9 feet tall with razor-sharp claws and teeth that could tear through steel. It was a nightmare brought to life. And it was now standing in front of the recruits, its gaze sweeping over them like a predator sizing up its prey. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the intensity of its stare. The other recruits were whispering frantically, but Emma couldn't look away. For some reason, the creature's gaze seemed to soften as it turned toward her. It was as if it had sensed something within her. General Wraith stepped forward, the momentary shock wearing off. He raised his hand and motioned for the creature to halt. To everyone's surprise, the Predator X obeyed without question. It stopped dead in its tracks, its massive form still as stone. The air was thick with confusion. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, in a voice that was both commanding and curious, the general spoke. "Recruit Emma," he said, his eyes narrowing, as he glanced back at her. "Do you know why it stopped?" Emma's mind raced. She had no idea. She had heard the stories, how the Predator X didn't obey anyone, how it was meant to be controlled only through intense training and dominance. She had seen it tear through entire squads of soldiers without hesitation. And yet, here it was, standing perfectly still before her, as if waiting for her command. "No. Sir?" Emma said, her voice shaky. I have no idea." The general's eyes softened, though only slightly. "Interesting," he muttered under his breath. He looked over at the other officers, who exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever seen anything like this before. The creature was a force of nature, wild, uncontrollable. But for some reason, it had chosen to obey Emma. As the training continued, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The creature's presence lingered in the back of her mind. There was a strange connection forming, something she couldn't quite understand, but she knew it was there. She didn't know why, but she felt an unspoken bond growing between them. Was this a sign? Emma wondered. What was it about her that made this deadly predator listen to her? With the morning's training over, the recruits were sent back to their barracks. Emma lay on her cot, staring up at the ceiling, her mind racing. Tomorrow they would face more challenges, more tests. But something told her that her journey had only just begun. And in the back of her mind, one thought kept repeating itself. She was just a human recruit, but somehow the apex predator obeyed her every step like a loyal hound. The trial of strength. The morning sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the training grounds. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of charged energy that only came before something monumental. For the recruits, today would be a day they'd never forget. Today, they would face their first real test, and for Emma, it would be more than just a test of strength. It was a test of survival. Emma stood at the edge of the training field, her heart pounding in her chest. The sound of her pulse echoed in her ears as she took in the scene before her. The recruits were lined up, ready to face whatever challenge General Wraith had planned for them. But Emma had a sense that her challenge would be different. Today she would have to face the creature again. The Predator X, the fearsome apex predator that had halted the moment it laid eyes on her the day before, was standing in the center of the field. Its massive form loomed like a dark shadow, its eyes scanning the recruits with a predatory gleam. The creature was as deadly as it was magnificent, with muscles rippling beneath its sleek, scaled skin. It looked like something straight out of a nightmare. Yet there was an undeniable presence about it, an ancient, primal force that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. General Wraith stood beside the beast, his eyes scanning the recruits as they stood at attention. He was a man of few words, but when he spoke, every syllable carried weight. "Today," he began, his voice cold and commanding, "you will face your greatest challenge. The Predator X will test your endurance, your resolve, and your instincts. Each of you will take turns facing it in a series of trials. Only those who prove themselves worthy will move forward. The rest will be eliminated." The recruits shifted, nervously, and Emma could feel the tension in the air. The thought of standing in front of such a creature made her knees tremble, but she was determined not to let fear control her. Yesterday, the creature had obeyed her. She had to find out. Why? General Wraith's gaze turned to Emma, and for a brief moment she locked eyes with him. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her feel both small and important at the same time. "Emma," the general called, his voice cutting through the silence. "You will go first." Emma's stomach dropped. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a split second she felt the urge to turn and run. Why me, she thought. I'm not ready for this. But before she could think about it any longer, she found herself walking towards the center of the field, each step heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. The Predator X stood there, waiting for her. Its eyes followed her every move, its posture alert and ready. As Emma approached, the creature tilted its head slightly, its yellow eyes narrowing. She couldn't help but feel the weight of its gaze, as if it were studying her, trying to understand her. It was unnerving, General Wraith's voice cut through the tension. You'll need to outsmart it, recruit. This isn't about brute strength, it's about survival. Emma nodded, trying to steady her breathing. She glanced at the creature, but there was no fear in her heart. The strange connection she'd felt yesterday lingered, a quiet voice telling her that the beast wasn't here to harm her, not yet at least. The test began. Emma moved slowly at first, keeping her distance from the Predator X. She didn't know what to expect, but she was certain of one thing. She wasn't going to make the same mistake as the others. She had to stay calm, stay focused. The Predator X made the first move. It lunged forward with incredible speed, its claws slicing through the air like knives. Emma's heart leapt into her throat, but she instinctively ducked, rolling to the side just in time to avoid its deadly swipe. The beast let out a growl of frustration and turned, its eyes burning with intensity. Emma scrambled to her feet, her mind racing. What now? For the first time in her life, she didn't feel helpless. Something inside her clicked, something deep, primal. She remembered the way the predator had paused when it looked at her the day before. It had trusted her. She didn't know why, but it had. Emma reached into her mind, drawing on that strange feeling. She stared at the creature, willing herself to stay calm. She wasn't going to fight it. She wasn't going to beat it. She needed to make it listen. With a deep breath, she took a step forward, holding her ground. The Predator X hesitated for a split second. The air felt thick as they stared at each other. Emma's eyes locked with the creature's. "Stay," she whispered, not sure where the words came from. But to her surprise, the Predator X stopped. It froze, its massive body tense, as if awaiting further instructions. General Wraith's jaw tightened. "What did you just do?" Emma didn't answer him. She didn't need to. The beast remained still, its eyes fixed on her. She could feel the bond between them, as if some invisible thread connected their fates. The creature was obeying her, and that, in itself, was a victory. The trial continued. The other recruits watched in stunned silence as Emma and the Predator X danced around each other, moving in a strange harmony. Each time the creature made a move, Emma responded, guiding it with gentle commands, barely audible yet commanding, in their own way. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the creature stepped back, bowing its head slightly as if acknowledging Emma's control. General Wraith stepped forward, his face unreadable. "Well, well," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "It seems we have something unexpected here." The other recruits were still processing what they had just witnessed. How was that possible? They had all heard the stories. The Predator X didn't obey anyone. But Emma had done something no one thought possible. And as she stood there, catching her breath, she realized something. This wasn't just a test of her physical strength. It was a test of her will, her ability to connect with something far beyond her understanding. The creature had obeyed her. But why? And what did this mean for the trials ahead? Emma didn't know yet, but she was certain of one thing. This was just the beginning. The first mission. The air was thick with tension as Emma stood in the briefing room, surrounded by officers and high-ranking officials. The large, cold walls of the military base seemed to close in around her as the gravity of what was about to happen sank in. Today wasn't just any day. Today, Emma was being sent on her first mission. Her stomach churned, but she fought to keep her composure. The sense of dread that had been growing inside her since she joined the training program was now a living, breathing thing. She had been a librarian only a few weeks ago, and now she was about to embark on a high-stakes mission that could be her last. General Wraith stood at the front of the room, his posture as rigid as ever. He was flanked by officers, all of whom had eyes only for Emma. There were no words of encouragement, no smiles. The mission was too important, too dangerous, for pleasantries. "Recruit Emma?" General Wraith's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You've proven yourself capable of surviving in the field. You've earned your place here, but now you'll face a real test." His eyes briefly flickered toward the Predator X, which stood by the door, its massive form barely fitting in the room. Its eyes, yellow and unnervingly intelligent, were fixed on Emma. Your objective is simple. Infiltrate an enemy stronghold located on the outskirts of the desert region. Gather intel, extract key targets, and return. No mistakes, no hesitation. This is your chance to prove your worth. Are you ready? The weight of his words pressed down on her chest. No hesitation. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but she nodded. Yes, sir. The officers nodded in approval. Then, the silence was broken by the sound of heavy footsteps behind her. Emma turned to find the Predator X slowly moving toward her. The creature was not just a weapon. It was her companion. A strange thought, but in that moment, she realized that she was no longer alone. The massive beast had chosen her. It was the only reason she had made it this far. And now it was time for them to work together. General Wraith turned to the officers. The creature will be her backup. It is to stay within range but not interfere unless absolutely necessary. Emma didn't feel reassured. If the creature was to obey her, she had to trust it, even though there was no real explanation for why it listened to her in the first place. The brief was short but precise. Weapons were handed out. A sleek black suit, designed for stealth and flexibility, was placed on the table in front of her. Emma's fingers brushed against it, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She had no choice but to wear it. The suit would help her blend in, enhance her speed and agility, but there was no armor. The mission required stealth, not brute force. With everything ready, Emma stepped into the transport vehicle that would take them to the target area. Her hands trembled slightly as she tightened her grip on the seat. What have I gotten myself into? The vehicle sped through the barren landscape, the engines humming with power. It felt like hours, but in reality, it was only a matter of minutes before they arrived. The base was situated deep within a rugged mountain range, hidden beneath layers of reinforced concrete and steel. Their intel said the area was crawling with enemy soldiers, heavily armed and on high alert. But Emma wasn't worried about them. Her concern was much bigger than that. As they approached the landing zone, Emma's mind drifted back to the creature. The Predator X had become almost tame around her. It had followed her every move during the training exercises, and now it was expected to follow her into enemy territory. She had no idea why it obeyed her, why it seemed to trust her so fully, but there was no time for questions. She would find out the truth later when there was time to breathe. The vehicle came to a screeching halt, the wheels skidding on the gravel as they arrived at their designated drop-off point. The hatch opened and Emma quickly stepped out, the cool desert wind brushing against her face. "We're on foot from here," one of the officers said, gesturing toward the entrance to the base. The team scattered, spreading out into the darkness, like shadows. Emma and the Predator X moved as one, keeping their movements fluid and synchronized. She glanced at the creature, but its gaze never left the path ahead. It was strange. The Predator X, which had been engineered for destruction, now seemed to be following her lead, responding to her slightest gestures. She didn't know why it trusted her, but right now there was no time to dwell on it. The mission came first. They reached the outer wall of the enemy base without incident. The first obstacle was a large steel gate, heavily fortified and guarded. 2 enemy soldiers stood at the entrance, their guns slung casually over their shoulders. Emma could hear their voices, low but clearly audible. "That's our first problem," Emma whispered to herself. She had no intention of getting caught. Her mind raced, formulating a plan. She reached into her gear pouch and pulled out a small device that would scramble the guards' communication systems for a brief moment. That would be enough time to take them down quietly. But as she prepared to activate it, something unexpected happened. The Predator X, which had been standing behind her, suddenly surged forward. Emma barely had time to react before the creature pounced, its claws slashing through the air with terrifying speed. In a matter of seconds, both guards were incapacitated, lying unconscious on the ground. Emma stood frozen, staring at the scene before her. She hadn't given the command. She hadn't told the creature to act. And yet, it had acted on its own, as if it had known exactly what needed to be done. The bond between them was growing deeper, by the second. "Focus, Emma," she muttered to herself, shaking off the shock. There was no time to question the creature's actions. She had to move forward. They made their way through the base's underground tunnels, avoiding detection at every turn. The further they went, the more Emma realized just how dangerous this mission really was. The walls were lined with security cameras, laser grids, and armed patrols. It would take all her skills, all her focus, to succeed. But she wasn't alone. The Predator X, for all its terrifying power, was by her side, waiting for her next command. The two of them had become something more than just a soldier and a weapon. They were a team, and together they would complete this mission. The final test was ahead. The intel they needed was deep inside the enemy's main command center. Emma's heart raced as she prepared to infiltrate the most heavily guarded area of all. She couldn't afford to fail. There was too much at stake. But as they neared the center, something deep within her stirred, a quiet whisper, like a distant memory. This was no ordinary mission. And the creature by her side? It wasn't just a beast. It was part of her destiny. The real test had just begun. The unveiling of the bond, the base was quiet now, eerily so. The hum of the ventilation systems, the distant murmur of enemy soldiers, and the occasional beeping of security monitors were the only sounds breaking the silence. Emma and the Predator X had moved deeper into the heart of the enemy base, and yet, despite the growing sense of danger, she felt a strange calm. It was as if the creature was more than just a tool to her. It had become a part of her, responding to her thoughts before they even formed. But that feeling, one that had only started to take root during their training, was now undeniable. The bond between them had shifted. It was no longer just about survival or obedience. It was something deeper, something ancient. As they crouched behind a row of crates in the shadowy corridor, Emma found herself staring at the creature. Its glowing yellow eyes reflected the dim light above, focused and alert. Its massive body was poised, waiting for her next move. But there was something almost human in the way it watched her. It wasn't just following orders anymore. It was listening, as though it understood her in ways she couldn't explain. "Stay alert," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. It was a simple command, yet it seemed to settle the tension in the air. The creature's head tilted slightly, acknowledging her words, and Emma felt a strange surge of connection. There was no sound, no words. But she knew the Predator X had heard her, and somehow, it understood. They continued their approach to the enemy's central command center. The closer they got, the more Emma could feel the weight of the mission pressing on her chest. The intel they needed was housed in a heavily guarded server room locked behind layers of security. It wasn't just any mission, it was a high-risk operation, one that would either make or break her reputation among the higher-ups. But as she neared the door to the server room, something unexpected happened. A sharp, intense pain shot through. Her mind, and Emma stumbled slightly, her vision blurring for a brief moment. She clutched her head, feeling the sudden, overwhelming sensation of being watched, not just by the soldiers ahead, but by something much more powerful, more ancient. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog from her thoughts. "Emma." The voice came low and haunting. It was not her own voice, it was the Predator's. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. The connection, this strange, unexplainable bond between her and the creature, it was deeper than she had thought. This wasn't just a matter of survival or even obedience. It was a shared consciousness, a silent understanding between two beings who on paper should have been enemies. The voice wasn't a spoken one. It was more of a feeling, a pulse in the air that seemed to reverberate in her bones, a presence that filled the space between them. The creature was communicating with her. In that moment, Emma understood. The Predator X was not just a machine, not just a genetically engineered monster. It was something more, something sentient. Her heart raced as the voice grew clearer, though the words were unformed like fragmented thoughts passing through her mind. "Danger," it whispered. "They're watching, not just here, but inside." Emma took a sharp breath. Inside, was the Predator X trying to warn her about something she hadn't considered? A deeper threat, something beyond the enemy soldiers, and the mission itself? Emma, the voice whispered again, and this time the creature's warning was clear. Don't trust them. The words hit her like a tidal wave. The soldiers they had been infiltrating were nothing more than pawns. The real enemy wasn't just the base. It was something much bigger, something that had been pulling the strings all along. The sudden revelation left Emma frozen in place. The enemy had known they were coming. They had known from the start. She glanced over at the creature, its glowing eyes locked with hers as if urging her to act. Its presence was heavy in the air, the bond between them unspoken, but undeniable. Emma realized now that the connection she shared with the creature wasn't by chance, it was purposeful. It wasn't a random twist of fate. She had been chosen. And the Predator X, this creature of unimaginable power, was here to protect her. Not just because of its programming, but because it shared in her purpose. But that didn't make things any easier. Emma gritted her teeth, shaking off the overwhelming sense of dread. The mission wasn't over, but now it was more complicated. The higher-ups had sent her here for intel, but they hadn't prepared her for the truth, hadn't warned her about the greater game being played behind the scenes. And if she was going to survive, she couldn't trust them. She had to make a choice. She had to decide whether she would follow the mission and the orders that had been given to her, or whether she would trust the creature at her side, the only thing that had never lied to her. The sound of footsteps approaching snapped Emma out of her thoughts. The enemy soldiers were drawing closer, and the mission was quickly approaching its climax. She couldn't afford to be distracted any longer. Stay close, Emma whispered to the Predator X, though the words felt unnecessary. The creature was already beside her, its presence like an unspoken promise. They moved swiftly, the creature's silent footsteps matching hers perfectly, as they moved deeper into the heart of the enemy stronghold. The server room was ahead, but Emma no longer felt the same urgency she had felt earlier. The truth had been revealed to her, and now every step she took felt heavier. She wasn't just facing the enemy anymore. She was facing her destiny. As they reached the door to the server room, Emma hesitated for a moment, placing her hand on the cold surface. The bond with the Predator X pulsed once more, steady and strong. It was more than just a tool or weapon. It was a partner, a protector, guiding her toward a future she wasn't yet ready to understand. But she didn't need to understand everything. Not yet. She pressed her hand against the door, and it slid open with a quiet hiss. The mission was still on, but now, the stakes had changed. What had started as a simple infiltration had turned into something much, much bigger. The truth was out there, hidden behind the walls of this facility, and Emma was about to uncover it. The growing threat. The soft hum of the base's central command center reverberated through the thick concrete walls. Inside, the flickering lights cast shadows across the rows of consoles and glowing monitors, painting the scene in eerie shades of green and blue. Emma stood in the dimly lit corridor, just outside the server room, her pulse quickening as she crouched behind a stack of crates. Her breath was steady, but beneath her calm exterior there was a storm brewing. She had expected danger, but not this. The sudden change in the Predator X's behavior had thrown her off balance. It had been increasingly clear that the creature had become more than just a weapon or a loyal companion. It had grown attached to her. Emma had felt the shift before, in the way the creature moved in sync with her, how it seemed to anticipate her commands without hesitation. But this was different. The bond had deepened in ways she couldn't yet comprehend, and now she could sense it. The air had shifted. Something was wrong. The creature, usually so calm and collected, was pacing nervously beside her. Its usually unblinking yellow eyes flickered toward the distant security cameras. It was aware, more so than Emma had ever felt before. There was a tension in the way it held itself, a coiled readiness that told her it wasn't just reacting to external threats, it was reacting to something deeper. Something had triggered it, and the creature's instinct was to protect her, at all costs. "Stay close," Emma whispered under her breath, the words barely audible as she leaned in toward the creature. A low growl rumbled deep in the Predator X's chest. It was subtle but unmistakable. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The beast wasn't just preparing for the soldiers, it was bracing itself for something far worse. They had reached the final phase of their mission. The intel they needed was stored in the base's main server vault. But the closer they got to their objective, the more Emma felt a strange pull in her gut. It was like an invisible thread, drawing her forward, but also warning her. The place was too quiet, too still. She could hear the faintest sound of movement. In the distance, guards, patrols, but also something else. A presence. Something was waiting for her. "General Wraith knew something we didn't," Emma muttered under her breath. The thought had been creeping at the back of her mind ever since they'd entered the base. The mission had been too easy. The subtle warnings from the creature, its heightened awareness, only confirmed her suspicions. She glanced over at the Predator X. Its eyes flicked toward her, meeting her gaze with an intensity she had never seen before. There was a sense of urgency now, a wordless communication between them. The bond they shared was no longer just a tool of survival. It was a connection that ran deeper than either of them fully understood. But that was the last thing on her mind right now. What she had to figure out was why the creature had become so agitated. Without warning, a loud alarm blared to life, shattering the silence. Red lights began flashing overhead, casting the hall in a wash of frantic colors. Emma's heart jumped into her throat, her instincts kicking in. She didn't hesitate. She dove behind the nearest console, pulling the Predator X down beside her. The creature's low growl filled the space as it scanned the surroundings, its muscles tensed and ready. "Move," Emma commanded in a whisper, her voice steady. They had to get to the server room. They had to get the intel before everything went sideways. But as they started to move, Emma felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. There was something else. A deep, low rumble beneath the base, vibrating the floor. It wasn't the sound of a normal attack, nor was it the noise of an explosion. It was something more unnatural. The ground trembled as if something large, massive, was approaching from below. The Predator X's growl grew louder, its teeth bared, its hackles raised in anticipation. This was no ordinary mission anymore. The base's defenses had been triggered, and something was coming for them. Emma's mind raced as she quickly processed the new information. The threat wasn't just the enemy forces anymore. This was something far worse, something they hadn't prepared for. The rumbling grew stronger, louder, as if the earth itself was shaking under the weight of an incoming force. Emma instinctively reached for the small comm device on her wrist, trying to contact General Wraith. But before she could press the button, a harsh, guttural voice came through her earpiece. "Reinforcements are already on their way. You're on your own from here, recruit," the voice crackled. It was Wraith's voice, but it was cold, detached. Like he knew exactly what was happening, like he had planned it all. What? Emma's stomach sank. Wraith had known. He knew about the real threat, and he had sent her in unprepared. She had been nothing more than bait. They hadn't sent her here for the intel. They had sent her here to get them, to lure the enemy out and see what the creature could do. The full realization hit Emma like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just a pawn in a military operation. She was a test subject, an experiment. And the Predator X, the creature she had come to trust, was just another variable in Wraith's game. With a sudden sharp hiss, the ground beneath them cracked open, and the walls of the corridor splintered. Emma stumbled back as a massive, towering figure emerged from the depths below, a creature unlike anything she had ever seen. It was a behemoth, an alien thing covered in heavy armor plates, its red eyes glowing with malice. It had no human form, only a dark silhouette that moved with terrifying speed. It was the true threat, the one that Wraith had been hiding. And it wasn't alone. More of the creatures began to emerge, filling the corridor like a flood, their growls and screeches echoing through the base. "Emma!" the Predator X's voice roared in her mind. "Get out!" The floodgates had opened, and there was no turning back now. Emma's heart raced as she drew her weapon, preparing for the fight of her life. But this time, the stakes were higher than just a mission. This was about survival. Her survival. The base had become a battlefield, and Emma was trapped at the heart of it, with only the creature beside her to stand in the way of an army of horrors. And as she glanced at the Predator X, the weight of the bond between them became painfully clear. They weren't just partners. They were family. And this time, they would fight together to survive. The betrayal. The base had descended into chaos. Sirens wailed, the ground trembled with the force of explosions from all directions, and the distant screeches of alien creatures filled the air, sending shivers down Emma's spine. The walls, once solid and intimidating, now felt like they were crumbling around her. She barely registered the thundering footsteps of the Predator X as it moved beside her, but she could feel its presence, its primal energy, an unspoken promise that they would survive together. Emma's mind raced as she sprinted through the dimly lit corridors, narrowly avoiding another explosion that sent debris flying in every direction. The enemy had poured in from every angle, forces beyond anything the military had prepared for, and what was worse, the voice in her ear, General Wraith's voice, had been eerily absent for far too long. She had been used. Emma had suspected something was off, but now she knew. She wasn't the one in control of this mission. She had never been. The brief flashes of communication that she had received from Wraith before the chaos began had been cryptic at best. "Reinforcements are on their way," he had said, but it wasn't a reassurance, it was a statement of abandonment. She was expendable. The Predator X was expendable. All of it had been a game to Wraith. And now, as the dust settled and Emma found herself in the midst of a fight for survival, Her thoughts were clouded by one overwhelming realization. Wraith had betrayed her. "Emma, they are coming," the Predator X growled in her mind. Its voice was strong, urgent, but there was something darker, more dangerous in its tone. It could feel the shift, too. Something was wrong. Emma shot a glance at the creature. It was, moving swiftly beside her, its heightened senses picking up on every movement, every shift in the air. Emma had become accustomed to the bond they shared, the silent understanding that passed between them. But this was different. The air felt heavier. The Predator X was sensing something more than just danger. It was sensing the growing threat of betrayal, something that had been planted deep within the mission itself. "They were always going to sacrifice you," the creature's voice whispered through her mind. "He was never your ally." Emma's breath caught in her throat. He. The realization hit her harder than any weapon could. Wraith. He was the mastermind behind this mess. It wasn't just the base's destruction she was dealing with. It was his manipulation, his cruel desire to see her, and the creature, become tools in his larger game. A game of power, control, and survival. The sudden blast of an incoming shot snapped her back into reality. Without thinking, Emma dove to the side, rolling just in time to avoid a burst of gunfire. She didn't know where the enemy had come from. They had been waiting. The betrayal didn't end with Wraith's manipulation. It was now part of her reality. The soldiers in this base had been in on it. They knew about the mission's real objective. They knew she was being tested, and they had planned for her to fail from the start. But the real twist? They knew the Predator X wasn't just a tool. It was a test of its own, a test to see what would happen if a human could control such power. Now the creature wasn't just fighting for survival. It was fighting for its own freedom, too. Emma's thoughts were cut short as she turned a corner, her weapon raised, scanning for any movement. But what she saw stopped her cold. In the distance, standing in front of the access door to the main control room, was General Wraith. He was alone, and his posture was rigid as though he had been expecting her. A cold smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "Did you think I wouldn't see this coming?" Wraith's voice rang out, chilling in its calmness. "You were always just a test, Emma. Just a tool to see if this beast could be tamed." Emma's chest tightened with anger, but she kept her focus. This was it. She was done being a pawn in his game. "You were never meant to succeed," Wraith continued, his words like poison. "I gave you everything you needed to fail, and you still managed to get this far. Impressive, but now it's over." Emma's heart pounded as the realization fully sank in. Wraith hadn't just betrayed her. He was playing a much bigger game. He was using her to unlock the full potential of the Predator X, to see if the creature could be controlled by a human. The moment she realized this, the weight of his betrayal became even more crushing. He didn't care about her success, he cared about control. The Predator X growled beside her, its primal instincts screaming. "You cannot trust him. He will use you both until there's nothing left." Wraith took a step forward, the smug smile still fixed on his face. "You're dangerous, Emma. You and the creature. You're a threat I didn't anticipate. But now I'll make sure that ends." With a sudden motion, Wraith activated a hidden control on his wrist. The walls around them hummed, and the lights above flickered in time with the sound of a massive door opening. The sound of mechanical clanking echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The trap had been set. Wraith had planned for the moment she'd come face to face with him. And now there was no way out. But Emma wasn't going to go down without a fight. In a split second, she reacted. The Predator X's eyes glowed with an intensity Emma had never seen before, and the creature leaped forward with a ferocity that sent a shockwave through the room. It wasn't just following Emma's lead. It was protecting her, moving with an urgency that matched her own desire for survival. Emma sprinted toward Wraith, her gun raised, but the traitor didn't flinch. Instead, his gaze darkened, and as if on cue, a squad of soldiers emerged from the shadows, their weapons raised and aimed directly at her. This was it. Emma could feel the weight of everything crashing down on her. Wraith had betrayed her, but in that moment she realized something else. She didn't need him anymore. She didn't need anyone. The Predator X had become more than a weapon. It was her ally, her partner, and together they would fight. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And General Wraith? He had made a dangerous mistake. He had underestimated Emma, and he would soon see just how wrong he was. The ultimate bond, an unseen future. The chaos in the base had reached a crescendo. The walls around them vibrated with the roar of explosions, and Emma's chest heaved with the adrenaline of the fight. General Wraith's betrayal still stung, but Emma had no time for the bitterness it brought. It was all or nothing now. She was out of options, but that was exactly when she realized something. She had the power. No one else. The Predator X stood beside her, its body rippling with strength, its movements as precise as ever. The bond between them was no longer just a survival mechanism. It was something stronger, something unbreakable. They were one in mind, one in purpose. Emma had always thought she was just a tool, just a pawn in someone else's game. But now, she understood. She had been the one in control all along. The bond with the creature wasn't a fluke. It was a choice made long before she had ever set foot in the base. Wraith had underestimated that bond. With every shot, with every move they made, Emma and the Predator X worked as a seamless unit, taking down enemy soldiers, dismantling the traps set for them, and pushing forward toward their goal. Emma's weapon flashed as she took out the remaining threats, her hand steady despite the rising tension in the air. The base was collapsing in on itself, but they were unstoppable now. Together they were unstoppable. As they reached the final chamber, the heart of the base, Emma could feel the weight of the air shift. The door to the control room loomed ahead, and for a brief moment she hesitated. Was she ready for what came next? Was she prepared for the full revelation of the truth? Yes, she was. She had to be. With a final push, she reached for the control panel and activated the doors. The system hummed, and the heavy doors slid open with a hiss, revealing the heart of the facility. It was a large, high-tech room with monitors lining every wall, cables running like veins across the space. It was here that General Wraith had masterminded everything. His experiments, his twisted plans, his testing ground for both the creature and Emma. But Wraith wasn't there anymore. The room was empty, save for the sprawling tech setup. Then the voice came. Wraith's voice, cold, calculating and oddly distant, as though he were watching from somewhere far beyond the base. You think you've won, Emma? Wraith's voice crackled through the speakers. You're nothing but a tool, a puppet, and the Predator X? It's nothing more than a weapon, a means to an end. You're both expendable. Emma's breath caught in her chest, but she wasn't afraid anymore. The rage that had been building inside her for so long, the betrayal she had felt, it fueled her now. She wasn't the naive recruit anymore. She had found her strength. She had found her purpose. The Predator X growled low, its eyes narrowing. It wasn't just a beast anymore. It wasn't a mindless killing machine. It was her partner, her ally, and Wraith's words meant nothing. "You're wrong." Emma's voice rang out, clear and strong. "You underestimated me. You underestimated us." The screens in front of her flickered, and suddenly, a countdown timer appeared on one of the large monitors. 10 minutes, 9 minutes, 8. The base was rigged to self-destruct. Wraith had set the timer in case things went wrong. He was planning to wipe everything clean, including himself. The countdown had begun, and in less than 10 minutes, the base would be reduced to rubble. "Do you think you can stop it in time?" Wraith's voice echoed again, almost mocking. "You can't. This place was always meant to fall. You were never meant to survive." But Emma wasn't listening. She was already moving, already searching the control room for a way to disable the countdown. She wasn't going to let this be the end, not after everything she had fought for. The Predator X paced beside her, its presence a constant grounding force. It was ready. It was waiting for her to lead it to victory, together. She spotted a terminal connected to the main system and rushed toward it, her fingers flying across the keys. The clock was ticking, but Emma was steady now. She knew she could do this. She had to do this. For herself. For the creature that had stood by her side. For the future. The terminal beeped and the countdown timer flickered. There was a brief moment of silence before the system accepted her override command. 0. For a long breath, the room was still. Then with a soft click, the countdown ceased. Emma exhaled in relief. She had done it. They had done it. But there was no time to relax. Not yet. The escape tunnels were their only way out, and the base was already beginning to implode around them. Emma could feel the vibrations of the collapsing structure beneath her feet as she sprinted toward the exit, the Predator X at her side, its primal energy matching her urgency. As they ran, Emma felt the bond between them shift once more. It was no longer about survival. It was about something much larger. She didn't know where the future would take her, but she knew one thing for certain. The creature wasn't just a beast. It was her family, and the two of them would face whatever came next, together. They burst through the final set of doors, just as the base began to crumble behind them. The ground shook violently, but they kept running. The explosion behind them was deafening, the shockwave pushing them forward. But Emma didn't look back. They had escaped. They had won. And as the dust settled in the distance, Emma finally understood what her bond with the Predator X truly meant. The story wasn't over. In fact, this was only the beginning. And whatever the future held, she was ready to face it, with the apex predator by her side,